Hi, I'm Alex Vitale. I'm professor of sociology at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center and coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project. This is the fourth in a series of policy briefings we've been having to help inform the Mamdani administration and the general public about some crucial public safety issues facing New York City. Our past briefings have dealt with mental health crisis response, sex work policy issues, the use of sentinel event reviews to respond to police shootings. Today's briefing will deal with the problems of gang suppression policing and what we can do instead. Future briefings will look at school safety issues, how to address hate crimes, and we're looking forward to hearing from folks about other issues that they would like to see us cover. This particular briefing is especially important to us here at the project. The Policing and Social Justice Project was founded about 10 years ago, specifically to work on the issue of fighting against so-called gang takedowns that were happening during the Bloomberg and de Blasio administrations. And so this is something that our project's been working on for a long time. And we're founding members of the New York City Gangs Coalition that are co-sponsoring today's event with us. So we have an amazing panel of experts in this field from a variety of different perspectives. And so I'm going to ask our three panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about why this work is important to them. And I'm going to start with Babe Howell at CUNY Law School. Babe?
Yes, my name is Babe Howell. I'm a professor at CUNY Law School. I'm also a former public defender and taught a defender clinic at Hofstra before joining the law school faculty. My work focuses on the intersection of race, policing, and prosecutions. And the gang work is so important because once we slap the gang label on someone, they are dehumanized and treated in ways that are utterly inconsistent with our entire legal system. So it's the label attached to folks by the police that essentially destroys their rights as equal citizens in society. And it is more and more troubling by the day. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Babe. Victor Dempsey from LDF.
Peace and blessings, everyone. My name is Victor Dempsey. I'm a community organizer with Legal Defense Fund, where my main focus is criminal justice work that's rooted in community safety, accountability, and reducing harm caused by policing. My connection to this issue, like I've been saying lately, is both political and personal. I've spent years working alongside impacting young folks and families and community members. Um, who really know what it means to be over policed, being formerly incarcerated, being formerly gang involved as well, and understanding what those mislabelings and the threat of being treated like a suspect versus a person entails. I learned about this, the gangs work or the gang database from personal experience of being pulled over by a patrol car and being put in the back of a patrol car and seeing myself on the patrol screen depicted as a SRG gang member, which stands for Security Risk Group. Since then, I've been gracious enough to be able to work with and humbled to be able to work with the Gangs Coalition as one of the founding members as well, and just really being able to deepen that connection with folks who've been directly impacted in the community. And I'll stop there. Thank you all.
Thanks, Vic. And Erica Ford from Life Camp, which is part of the crisis management system here in New York.
Good day, Erica Ford. I'm part of the architect of the New York City crisis management system. I've been working in this field for 38 years and really have seen the investment in incarceration as opposed to helping young people and families healed. We can start from the crack epidemic in the 80s and the 90s that took a lot of our families to jail, to a BCW, or to the graveyard. And that trauma that impacted our community, there was never influx investment in people healing. And so today we see the grandchildren of those who, from the 80s and the 90s, are the ones that we're looking at on these databases, the children of those folks, and the cycle of incarceration. Feeding a community upstate has to stop.
Thank you, Erica. Uh, Vic and Babe and I have worked together for many years, but Erica and I have only gotten to know each other recently through our work on the mayor's transition subcommittee on community safety. And I think that has been important for me to be able to look more closely at the community-based strategies that we could be using, which we'll get back to a little bit later in the conversation. Babe, I wanted to start with you. Since this work for our team got started in many ways with the gang takedowns, could you tell us a little bit about that history, what these gang takedowns are, their relationship to federal and state conspiracy laws, and why you think this is a problem?
Sure, thank you, Alex. To start off with just a tiny bit of history, um, juvenile offenders historically in New York were given the off-ramps that are designed for them. Juvenile offender status, youthful offender status, alternatives to incarceration. In about 2012, the NYPD under Mayor Bloomberg announced Operation Crew Cut and began treating groups of young people, crews, as they called them, as gangs. One child or young adult, and honestly, this can go into your 20s, responsible for the worst conduct of other members of their peer groups. So you start to see gang takedowns with 5, 10, 20, or the biggest takedown had 120 individuals pulled in for the violent conduct of a handful of them. And then for many others, it would be, drug sales or marijuana or association. You would also see people pulled in these gang takedowns years after the fact and even arrested in jail while they were serving time for whatever the offense is that was packaged up into these RICO or conspiracy charges. So the shift to gang takedowns, I do have to make very clear, was unrelated to any increase in violent crime in New York. Violent crime was at historic lows. Juvenile crime was at historic lows. Um, and gang violence was a tiny, tiny portion of crime in New York. And that is because historically we were smart about gangs. We invested in outreach workers in the 60s and 70s when LA and Chicago were suppressing their gangs. So New York created Operation Crew Cut, uh, began gang takedowns, not because gangs were a problem, but because there was pushback against the over-policing of Black and brown youth. And this way they could, label groups in ways that could allow them to wait and watch and bring big, impossible cases, and, look like heroes tackling violent crime.
Thank you. Now, you have argued in the past that the rise of this kind of gang suppression policing is tied to the restrictions that were placed on the NYPD in their use of things like stop and frisk, certain of the trespass laws that they were using in this discriminatory fashion to target primarily Black and brown young people. So can you tell us a little bit about that connection?
Right. I have often referred to gang policing as stop and frisk on steroids, where stop and frisk requires police to have at least a reasonable suspicion based on articulable facts that criminal conduct is at hand. gang policing is based on what color is your shirt and what kind of shoes are you wearing and what photos did you post or lyrics on social media. So we have a world in which suddenly we can police based on what you look like and where you live and who your friends are. So it is cuffs off in terms of policing. Why would the NYPD do that? Because in 2012, when Operation Crew Cut was announced, the class had been certified in Floyd v. City of New York, the case challenging the NYPD's stop and frisk policing as one, uh, racially motivated in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and two, also based on illegal stops that violate the Fourth Amendment. So the writing was on the wall, not just in the courtrooms, but thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people marching in the street saying, you can't stop and frisk every black and brown person in New York, which is essentially what they were doing. In 2011, there were 685,000 stops and frisk. But this way, they can still profile black and brown people, but it's not reviewed by courts. And once again, the label does so much work because who opposes policing gangs? So it really was, what are we going to do? Stop and frisk is the way we use stop and frisk is being held to be unconstitutional in courtrooms. What shall we do? Looking around the country, New York was late to the gang policing game, partly because we don't have a huge gang problem. What we can do, though, is follow the playbook of other cities, label young black and brown people gang members, and that essentially deprives them of rights both on the street, which I think you hear more from other speakers, and in the courtrooms.
So in part, we should think about this whole referring to people and groups of young people as gangs as itself a kind of politically motivated strategy, that there's no inherent value in labeling youth violence or even groups of young people congregating together as gangs, except to demonize them and advance the ability to criminalize them.
That sounds fair enough. It also plays into the myths that we have about gangs, right? That they do have a shared goal, an organization. NYPD has honestly said operation, our New York City crews have no organization, no hierarchy, there's no shot caller, but they can still use this in a RICO case or a conspiracy case to attribute the criminal conduct of one to the rest of the group.
And once that accusation has been made, mobilizing any kind of defense is extremely complicated because of the permissiveness of these federal and state laws.
Right. It is essentially impossible. If you are prosecuted in one of these gang takedowns, your bail will typically be denied, speedy trial will be suspended. In trial, uh, all the rules of evidence, which typically would keep out your prior bad acts or bad acts of other people, don't apply because in a conspiracy, first I have to prove that there's a conspiracy, a group of, or a racketeering conspiracy, a group of people doing crime. So everything that, 10 other people have done in the last 10 years is relevant for my case. And that I know them, that I'm in photos with them, that I'm, posting memes that are, common to our group, that all makes me look so very guilty. And with the conspiracy or RICO charge, I'm facing decades. So the vast majority of people will simply plead guilty because it's almost impossible to defend this case. Due process is pretty much out the window. And it's insane because we are not getting accuracy out of these cases either. Five people may have done something, but you are sweeping up many other people. Simultaneously, they're typically built on cooperating witnesses. Often the people who are caught red-handed doing the worst crimes testify against others, and that is reseeding violence in our community. They release some people and then they prosecute others in ways that are not very accurate, not at all fair. Like what you would expect of due process is not available in these gang cases. And then finally, it's so counterproductive because we're spending untold millions building this case, watching groups that have problems, waiting and watching and building our case instead of investing in the communities and in alternatives before things go wrong.
And in your report on the Bronx 120 gang takedown, you
Mhm.
looked at each of the defendants and the cases brought against them, and you found that in fact the people accused of actually shooting someone were already in state prison when the takedown occurred. Is that correct?
Yeah, many of them were. Like the poster child like that came out with the announcement was that a 92-year-old woman unfortunately had been killed by a stray bullet in her home. But the person who shot that bullet into the air trying to scare off others and accidentally killed him had been serving time in prison since immediately after the case. There was no need to bring the case for him. And similarly, in the other biggest takedown, 103 in Harlem, one of the cases, there were two homicides and 103 taken down. One of the homicides, the perpetrators had been in prison for years. And that was the case with 54 of the 120. We found that they had already served time for the predicate acts that were the basis of their RICO charges. So, yeah, it's extremely performative, which is so troubling though because the results are not performative. They labeled many people felons who had grown up over policed, had moved on in life, in this conspiracy case that covered 9 years, and then brought them back in the system, gave them a new felony conviction. So yeah, many of them already did their time and are then being prosecuted again. A bunch of you may say, wait, what about double jeopardy? Double jeopardy has an exception for dual sovereignty. So the federal government can prosecute the same conduct that's already been prosecuted by the state because they're seen as different sovereigns. So
And
for law geeks out there, that's the answer.
and in about half of the Bronx 120 cases, the predicate charge, the most serious, like specific conduct ascribed to these individuals was marijuana related. Is that right?
I think that was closer to a third, but
A
fully
third.
two-thirds of
Okay.
them had no violence. That about one-third was marijuana cases, and another third were other, nonviolent drug charges. So you have fully 80 of the 120 not charged with any violence. And then, depending on how you think about simple gun possession, like 20 of them had a gun possession charge without a use of the gun. So you may think of that as violent. Many people across the United States consider that your Second Amendment right. So,
And even though there would be an advantage to this, for about half the individuals, there was never even an allegation that they were in a gang.
right. I mean, it was very interesting because in that takedown, this was the biggest and done by the Southern District of New York, but it would have been in cooperation with the NYPD. Those are the people labeling these young folks in the Bronx as gang members or associates. And in many cases they would include them in the racketeering charge, saying even though they're not a gang member, they sold weed at a discount to the gang leaders on their block. That would be kind of the way they would get the hook into folks. So that was troubling and surprising.
So, what can the mayor do about these conspiracy cases? Since this is a matter of state law, federal law, and the decision of borough prosecutors or federal prosecutors, what's the role of the mayor here,
Right. I mean,
potentially?
the mayor can try persuasion with prosecutors, but he has no sway. But where he really can and should and must protect young New Yorkers of color is by intervening with the police. They should not be labeling people as gang members. We have, it first off, not a crime to be a gang member, not a crime to be a crew member. Typically, people will age out of active or violent gang membership if you just leave them alone. Or better yet, they'll age out faster if you give them a job or other great things to be doing. So what he should be doing is shifting from policing of gangs on the street, making those priorities clear with the NYPD that he does nominally control, and investing in the alternatives you'll hear more about from others on this panel.
Thank you. Anybody have anything to add to that on the conspiracy cases issue?
Yeah, no.
Erica, no. Okay. So if not, let's move on. Victor, I wanted to ask you, you're part of the New York City Gangs Coalition, and that coalition has prioritized abolishing the gang database. We have a bill before the city council that would do that, that has numerous co-sponsors. And can you tell us a little bit about the nature of the database, why you think it's a problem, and what should be done about it?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that question too. I know Babe laid that a lot of everything out, especially talking about the Bronx 120, which was simply the impetus for us doing this work and getting more deeply involved with community members. But I think one of the biggest issues with the gang database as it looks now is it's really built on like this vague, subjective, and I deeply flawed criteria. People can end up on a database not just because they were convicted of a violent act, but in addition to who do they know, where you spend time the most at, how they dress, where police call it urban wear, streetwear, right? What police interpret as affiliations or repeated contact with law enforcement in heavily surveilled neighborhoods, which typically we know is Black and brown communities, right? And especially nitrogen developments. That means the database is not really measuring harm, it's measuring suspicion. If you look the part, then you are a suspect when it comes to a database without committing a crime. The database, what we've been seeing too, even through our Gangs Coalition work, is a database is used in ways that go far beyond intelligence gathering. It can honestly shape how police target neighborhoods. It shapes how prosecutors build conspiracy cases. It shapes how young folks are surveilled in schools and how entire social networks get interpreted through a criminal lens. And literally like through a criminal lens, that whole social network. It's from what we've seen over the years, it's become a tool that justifies enforcement first, instead of asking what type of support, what type of interventions or opportunities might actually reduce the harm. Another piece of this too is, and I think it's an extremely major problem, is there's a lack of transparency. There's a lack of transparency when it comes to due process. I know Babe alluded to this earlier too. This, you don't even have a fair chance to challenge your inclusion. Our partners at Legal Aid Society years ago, they started a For Yourself campaign. Just to ask New Yorkers, hey, for yourself to see if you're actually on this database, and let alone not knowing the impacts it has on you or the collateral consequences that's associated to being on the database. But how do you know if you don't even know you're on it until the impact hits you? So I think you have a system that can seriously impact someone's life without even knowing that they're being labeled to begin with. So yeah, when we talk about just trying to suppress this database, we're really talking about not just suppressing the database, but suppressing harmful surveillance tactics. Babe mentioned it earlier too. This is Stop and Frisk 2.0. It's just a new version of it.
And what are some of the things that can get you placed on the database that might surprise people?
I mean, I know folks may chuckle when I say this. Everything. If you are a black, brown body living in not just nitrous developments, but in predominantly black community, you will be put on a database. If you're associated to someone who is perceived to be in a gang, crew, or clique, you will be put on a database. What we've learned over the years is they have this quote unquote criteria, which there's about 3 sections of it. You know, the first one is typically self-admittance, not typically, is what law enforcement believes to be self-admittance, meaning that someone is openly volunteering information to law enforcement saying, I am in fact in a gang. How often does that happen? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, but that's what they say happens, right? A second portion of that is what they dub to be kind of their reliable resources. Unfortunately, in this instance, their reliable resources are other law enforcement agencies, such as parole and probation, school safety, which I don't know if folks notice, school safety is NYPD. When you get either one of those agencies and say, hey, I believe this person's on the database, that's all it's going to take because they're a reputable resource, right? Or reliable resource. This third area was this kind of scarce criteria too. There's basically about 6 areas where if they can check off 2 of these areas, then they will put you on the database. One is the type of clothing you wear. If you particularly wear a certain article of clothing or a certain color on a regular basis, you just put yourself in a gang, apparently, right?
And we saw this ridiculous list of colors, right?
Oh, man, we get into the list of colors, it's the entire rainbow. Like, and that's not an exaggeration, folks. I'm being honest, the entire rainbow. But it's wearing certain colors in clothing. If they see you frequently doing a particular handshake, which I don't know if you guys watch sports or not, but I think LeBron has a handshake for everybody in the league, right? What else is there? There's social media. They are monitoring social media. They have their own data centers where that's officers go to work, particularly just to monitor social media. If you live in nitrogen developments, that's it. Just live there. All you got to do is live there. Live in a nitrogen development, you're on it. If you are caught in possession of any type of gang paraphernalia, which in certain cases it might be a type of a paperwork or a document that has any type of gang language or lingo on it, they will then put you in it. But if they can check up any of those 2, then you can be put in a database. And then the last piece that I added is known associates. Even if they know, in fact, you are not a gang member, but you are associated, meaning your brother, your best friend, the guy you play basketball with at the YMCA, the lady who teaches you swimming lessons there. If you are associated to that person and they're a gang member, you're on the database. I know 2 folks that's not on the database right now, and they are wildly popular in celebrities. Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg. They're probably on, you turn the TV on the HGTV, you will see both of them in the same room together 24 hours, right? And they're celebrated. And again, it's not a knock to them, but the social status is a big issue as well when it comes to these databases.
We've foiled at one point some of the database information, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe Babe knows this too, but we also found that the police were just making up gang names and putting people in these gangs based on things like location or the kids all like the same song.
Yeah, I mean, I'm chuckling about it just because of the irony of it, right? Where we criminalize our youth for being creative and how they view themselves, but when law enforcement criminalizes youth for being creative, they can do what they want to do. And again, it's not a secret. Yeah, you grow up in a certain neighborhood and you're proud of where you grew up from. You typically might say, "Hey, we're the Roblox crew," because these kids like playing Roblox together. You know what I mean? But you just said that you're a crew. You know what I mean? If you live on 141st Street, I'm a 41 boy or something like that, right? But police aren't doing that. They're actually taking it and making groups of kids and putting them in it themselves, and these kids are completely unaware of it. And when I say kids, I also want to be aware. I'm not just talking about kids. We're talking about part about our 4Us as young as 10, all the way up to as old as 80. So we're talking about generations of folks being criminalized, not just a certain subsection of folks.
And how do young people experience being on the gang database? I mean, I'm sure some of them are not aware of it and maybe it doesn't have a direct impact on them, but what are some of the things that we're hearing of that we're aware of about the impact of actually being on the database?
I mean, I'll answer this and with two things in mind, right? It's partly of conversations I've had with young folks directly, but then also my understanding from our research and forums of how they impacted them directly through a law enforcement lens. I think young people really experience gang suppression policing as being judged before they even know them. Like legitimately, you don't even know these kids' names. You don't know if they're a basketball star, football star, art person, or they're into healing, right? But because they're black and they live in NYCHA or they speak Spanish and they live in Corona, they're being criminalized. Just period. A lot of times, not only are they just treated as such because of the zip code that they live in, or friend groups they're associated with, or even just their family connections. Most of these kids' online presence, it's kind of seen as like the online presence is telling a story about who they are. Some cases it's true, most cases it's not. I think that it means that they have to move through. They got to move through a world that's already carrying assumptions placed on them by police, law enforcement, and other institutions, literally. So these kids, unbeknownst to them, by the way, unbeknownst to them. And I think for a lot of young people, that experience feels like constant surveillance. We did a study not too long ago where young folks told us, they had to change the route that they walk to school every day. They might go 2 blocks up and make a left one day, then go 3 blocks up and make a right the next day, just because they don't want to be surveilled in a certain manner. It feels like being stopped, watch, question, follow, return, photograph, all of these things, right, and documented in ways that other young people are not. You're not going to see that as much in more affluent neighborhoods or white neighborhoods. And then when you think about it, you say over time that message sends a message, that the system expects danger from you before it expects a possibility from you. So these young kids are dealing with that. They're already dealing with, how do I grow up out here and just prove myself or prove that I'm worthy to be somebody, And then lastly, what I'll say to that is it also affects how young people relate to safety itself, which is part of the bigger issue here. When law enforcement approaches them primarily through suppression, it can deepen distrust. It makes kids feel isolated. It's almost like an alienation tool. You know what I mean? These kids don't know who to trust. A lot of times, young people are less likely to see institutions as places they can turn to. And then when that happens, it becomes even harder to build real safety. And a great example of that, too, and I don't want to say a great example of that, but just the rhetoric that law enforcement puts out there. And I like to say this, too. This database is not a tool of safety. It's a reactive measure versus a proactive measure. It's not stopping gang violence or street violence from happening. They're reacting to it, then they're criminalizing anybody associated or around it. So when we talk about gang suppression policing, we're not talking about only tactics. We're literally talking about how young people experience being socially and politically abandoned while still being heavily controlled and surveilled. So it's not funny, and I'm sorry I keep laughing about it. It's literally just the irony as I'm thinking of this question.
We laugh so that we don't cry, right?
Or scream.
Yeah. So why is it important that we abolish the gang database rather than imagining we could just reform it?
I don't want to take long answering this. To be honest, we could abolish it because we got folks like Dr. Erica Ford. Literally. We have folks like the crisis management system where alternatives are proven to be directly engaging with community members and folks that law enforcement write off. Dr. Erica Ford is doing the work and building these young folks up, right? And it's not just, when we talk about wraparound services, it's not just did you got a GED in the school and all. It's not just that. I've watched Life Camp grow into this gambit of resources where it's teaching young folks about health, it's teaching young folks about mental wellness, is teaching young folks how to sit and talk to each other in peer facilitation, right? That's not law enforcement. That's not surveillance and policing. You know, they have case managers. They have folks who check in with these kids at minimum 3 to 5 times a week, right? So it's an outlet for them. So sorry, I said I wasn't going to take up all that space, but I think that's a question for Dr. Erica Ford, because they're actually the ones doing the work on the ground in other pure violence crisis management and folks like that.
Great. Well, let's switch a little bit here. So what is it that you would like to see the Mamdani administration do about the database?
uh, to be honest, man, I want them to listen to directly impacted folks, right? Seriously, that's where it starts at. I mean, we're part of this Gangs Coalition, right? And for folks who don't know, Gangs Coalition stands for grassroots advocates for neighborhood groups and solutions. We adopted that because we wanted to take back that name, right? We wanted to minimize the negative connotation that gangs are associated with. Because prior to that, it was street formations. You know what I mean? When we think about this administration now, they need to be educated in the fears of surveillance. They need to be educated in how this over-criminalization of whole communities as a whole impacts the ecosystem. And when we talk about the ecosystems, everybody wrapped up into these areas. I think hearing from young folks about how they're being surveilled and what they need and identifying resources, that needs to be highlighted the most. We can talk about all the policy changes as much as we want, but they need to see the people that these policy changes are either impacting or could affect. So to be honest, they need to get out of City Hall and off of Broadway and out of the big house, wherever they are, and kind of be on the streets and listen to these young folks and actually believe in what they need.
And in terms of the city council bill to abolish the database, have we heard any direct statements from the mayor about this?
I believe when he was running for office, and maybe early on, he did stand with advocates to end the gang database and policing, and he understood the harms of it too. You know, he said that he would stand and he wants to remove it. Literally, he said it. Actually, it wasn't like a thought. He said this is something that he would do. You know, but I also think with this administration too, like, you know, in addition to that of his stance, is him having time to kind of review and reduce way gang allegations are used across agencies too. You know, not just NYPD, because that's shared information. That's a big issue. There should be a serious examination of how gang designations drive enforcement and who is being harmed for that by it. And that's what he stood on.
And just recently, the mayor said, that he's not prioritizing this, et cetera. And I understand the Gangs Coalition has just issued a statement. Babe, I think you have that statement that was just issued.
I do. Our basic position, though, is that we must erase the database entirely. It must be abolished, especially as you watch the government put people who they claim are gang members onto planes and send them to, and just remove them. There is no safe database. There's no reforming this. A list that 30,000 officers can access on their phone must be abolished, particularly in this day and age with federal law enforcement moving in on our communities. We did make a statement too, part of affordability is being able to walk to school without having to go around 3 blocks. It's being able to go to school or your job without getting picked up by the police, held for several hours, and debriefed. Being on this database means that they are picking up people constantly and making their lives utterly unaffordable, and that's utterly racialized. So if he cares about affordability, the Gangs Coalition has taken the position that's one more reason to erase the database. This is not a safe tool to be shared, nor is it a safe tool, or rather a weapon to be left in the hands of the NYPD. If someone has a criminal conviction, that information is available to them. Labeling people based on you posted rest in peace to my friend or happy birthday to the other person or you live in this building is not a reason to tax that individual as they walk down the street, to stop them, to arrest them for littering or jaywalking or ticket them. These are the harms that happen all the time to people in the database. So affordability requires eliminating the database and investing in much less expensive alternatives that we'll hear more about.
And do you have the actual statement from the Gangs Coalition? I think it's quite short.
I think it's long.
Oh, okay. Well,
While the
maybe,
mayor is focusing on racial equity and affordability, he would do well to address the extreme racial inequality in how young Black and Brown New Yorkers are policed every day. The NYPD uses the gang database to stop, question, frisk, harass, and arrest thousands of Black and Latino boys and young men. If the mayor is truly committed to realizing a more affordable New York for all, he must recognize that police harassment and perpetual criminalization directly contribute to the economic destabilization of Black and Brown communities. There can be no economic justice without racial justice. And the gang database is a blatant tool of racial discrimination. We hope he will remember that any gains we have made in public safety have come from community-based programming, violence interruption, and wraparound services for young people. It has not been and cannot be achieved by discriminatory stop and frisk policing. And I will stop there. It continues.
okay.
Uh, we're the Gangs Coalition on Instagram.
And we put the a link to the Gangs Coalition's website in the chat. So, Eric, I want to switch to you. Now, the police department says, well, shootings may be at historic lows, but we believe that, the bulk of the remaining shootings are tied to quote unquote gangs and crews, and therefore we have no choice but to hyper criminalize these young people who we suspect of being in quote unquote gangs and crews. But your history is about taking a different approach, not denying that that's a problem, but saying there's a solution other than policing. So tell us about the work that you've been doing and why the communities that you work in feel that this is so important.
Crime is a business. And I want to prerequisite my work with the business of incarceration. It is a business. And in order for that business to exist, they have to have people to go to jail. They have to have people go to their courts. They have to have people to go to the prisons upstate New York, where soul communities exist because of a prison. That's the sole economy of that community. And what feeds that community is our children. And so, if the question, as I talked about the crack epidemic in the 80s and the 90s, I saw broken people. And in seeing broken people and broken communities, the communities needed to be repaired. The people needed to heal. The question of parents going to jail for 20 and 30, 40 years, and a number of, we had 2,000 people killed a year in the 90s. That's a lot of families impacted. And so that generational trauma never got dealt with. And so when we look at the crime that we're talking about, that's folks' children who are the same ones we're talking about in a database system that tracks these families for years. Because this family is economy to somebody, somewhere, right? And so our approach, and I see some of the members of the New York City Crisis Management System on the Zoom, and I want to definitely shout out Haley and Wheelchairs Against Gun, Pastor Gail Monroe, Shadeja is who I see. Anybody else straight ahead, but it is a disease, and when you're resolving a disease, just like when you go to the emergency room, you go into the emergency room, you might go to triage, get your blood pressure, you might have to go straight to operation, but there's different things for different people because they all have different issues. And we treat each individual on both sides of the gun uh, with the same desire to change their lifestyle, the same desire to help them heal and transform. And so we not only interrupt and mediate conflict on the ground with our credible messengers, but we help families heal from both sides of the gun, inside the schools, inside the hospitals, everywhere that a young person is, and everything that a young person might need to grow and that family to be whole. We we work together as an ecosystem to bring those resources to that family and that young person.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what the crisis management system is for those who aren't familiar with it?
The crisis management system is 46 sites, 22 organizations in all five boroughs that build ecosystems around resolving the question of the disease of violence. And so we have frontline credible messengers, violence interrupters, hospital responders who work directly with hotspots, directly with hot situations, directly with interrupting and mediating conflict. But then we have a group of folks like Pastor Gill, who works with families, who the institutions in our community come together to be a place where people can go and do programming, get work, get connect with resources because in every church there's hundreds of people from different walks of life who can mentor these young people, who can provide workspace and internship opportunity for these young people, who can provide food for the young people in food drives. We have Kelly who works on the intergovernmental, more so like how do we, because everything we're talking about is marketing and promotion, right? It's the business of messaging. If I can message that you're a criminal, then people are going to look at you as a criminal. They're going to call the police on you. The police are going to come and treat you with extreme force because they're looking at you as a criminal. But if we can promote that you are a human being, that you are young people who needs resources at 12 and 13 and 14 years old to transform your generational trauma that you grew up in, right? Then we can provide you with after school programming. We can connect you with different events in the community. So we do both events for our participants and events for the community because we want to change the culture of violence. We want to change community norms so that you're not picking up the police and picking up the phone and calling the police for everything. You're not picking up the phone and calling ACS for everything. You pick up the phone and call the members of the New York City Crisis Management System, and we can send someone from the clergy. We can send a credible messenger. We can send a violence interrupter. We can send a survivor from the Survivor Network to go in and talk to folks who have just lost their child about, as Carolyn Dixon says, where do we go from here? Right? And so we can train folks to show up in this new field, right? Because when I started this work with the Black Men's Movement Against Crack in the 80s, and then the Code Foundation with Tupac, who sat right here in my living room with other, quote, gangsters and came up with the code to the streets along with his stepfather and others, saying that we have to have a method of operation that is going to lead young people out of this lifestyle. And this lifestyle, as my right hand A.U. Hogan said, if Einstein lived in the projects, he would have been selling drugs, right? Because the culture was given to folks. The economy of street crime was given to folks. That we, with the redlining and the discrimination in jobs, the food apartheid, the miseducation, the Ritalin, the Thorazine, the drugs that were given to folks while they were little kids in school. And so you were going up and you were going down and you weren't able to control your emotions. And so this business of incarceration had many tentacles that came in and destroyed our families, destroyed how we existed in our community. And so now we come in to repair and to rebuild and to help people heal and transform from the disease of violence.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this idea of the credible messenger and why this is such an important feature of these community-based violence intervention strategies?
In the Billionaires Club, right? Billionaires are credible messengers to other billionaires. And so they talk billionaire-ish, right? They wear billionaire-ish clothes. They go to billionaire-ish places and they hang out on the golf course. They're crews. They're bros on the field. They're drinking. They're doing all kind of things, and they're credible to each other because they live that lifestyle. In our community, there are brothers and sisters who have grown in these neighborhoods. And as Victor laid out, they've gone through the police harassment. They've gone through the school to prison pipeline, right? They've gone through discrimination and stop and frisk and every day being stopped by the police. And then, some people lose spirit and they don't go pay their ticket. And then they got a warrant, and then they get arrested, and then they go to jail, and then they're in jail, and then they get pressured and they get into a fight, and they got another charge, and they got started out with just a ticket that's now you're in jail for 20 years, right? Because that punch in that fight knocked that guy down and he died, right? Or he almost died, you got attempt murder. And so these brothers and sisters have gone through some of these same scenarios that make them credible. And what we do is we work with them and train them and make them suitable. And so they are able to come home to their communities and work with young people and get them to transform some of their pain into, as the line goes to power, to purpose, to the things that allow you not to get caught up, not knowing that they're still on a gang database system, right? And being targeted and looked at. And they went to jails and asked some of my participants, Erica knows that you're carrying guns. Erica knows that what you were doing. Erica know. Tell me. Just tell me that she knows because they want to lock me up. They want to criminalize me because if you can criminalize me, then you can destroy what is because as a young lady said, babe, that the numbers were going down, right? They didn't need any of this. The numbers were going down. But what they needed was to fill those prisons back upstate, right? They needed those communities to thrive. And the way that those communities thrive, and New York is upstate, and it's downstate in some cities and some states, but they needed those cities, those jails to thrive. They needed the guards to go back to work, the people who do the food, the people who do the clothes, the people who do the transportation, all of the people in that community that live off the prison, they needed it to function. And we were messing up their ability to have it function. And so, how do you do it? You create something new. Now we're going to do takedowns. And so you're going to watch a 12-year-old, you're going to watch a 13-year-old, and you're not going to invest in that individual. You're not going to find out who that person is and what happened to them and why they're hanging out over there or why they're not going to school. You're going to build a RICO case, which the dollar value doesn't match. And so you're not saving our community, right? And then the resources in terms of the census goes upstate. And so you're taking our loved ones, you're taking our resources, and you're fueling and you're giving power and lifelines to upstate while you're sucking the oxygen out of our community. And credible messengers know that, live that, and want to stop that.
Some people say what we need to throw everything at the problem of violence, the community stuff, social services, and the police. But what you're saying is that the approach of policing and incarceration is actually undermining the work that the community is trying to do. And we hear this all around the country from people doing this work. Can you tell us just a little bit more about what that looks like on the ground?
Definitely. If we're and like I said with the 12 and 13-year-olds, right? We just had a takedown here in Queens. We got all these big killers and all the I take down the toughest gang members in the world, right? And when you look at when you go into the meat of it, like she broke down, right? Five is weed, another one crossed the picket line, another one went outside after dark, right? They're little kids, right? And so instead of investing, we are working with these young people, right? And instead of co-producing and working with us, right? And saying, okay, we have this information about this individual and they're hanging with these people and that's going to lead to this. I'm going to give you some more money so that you can do more programming on family support. You can do some more programming on literature. I mean, literary, right? So that they can read, so that they can financial development, so they can break the wealth bank of poverty inside of their family, right? And so they just come and snatch these kids out. And when you snatch these kids out of our work, one, like I had faith in y'all, right? I really thought by joining this program and being part of this and changing my life. And so I might be 2 years into changing my life, and I'm in a RICO, like Babe said, from 5 years ago, from 4 years ago, right? And you're sitting there watching things that can destroy our community. They should go to jail for a murder that happened after the first time you watch, because you're sitting there watch these kids create or allegedly commit crimes and you're not doing anything about it, right? You're watching more crimes get committed. And so so it disturbs the whole flow of our community, right? And trust and rely and just our ability to because these are our kids. These are our kids, and we really want to see them transform past this target from the 80s. And I can go back beyond the 80s, but that's when I was a teenager, right? That's when I saw what was happening in Southeast Queens, right? When I saw them bring drugs and gun, because we don't own those factories, we don't own those ships, and so on and so forth. And so, the if we're not co-producing public safety, then we're coming at odds to each other. And you're coming in my community looking at all of us as criminals, right? And then saying that the only thing that can resolve this is if I lock up XYZ, right? Without any kind of anything, right? And now they want to lock us all up. They want to lock us all up. They want to criminalize us all. And so, I think that it suppresses our ability to really transform the culture of violence that is systematic. It's not, something that cannot be changed. It's systematic and they run the system.
You mentioned some different roles that credible messengers play, and I wanted to focus on two that are central to the crisis management system. One is the violence interventionist, and the other is the outreach worker. Could you tell us what the difference of those are and what their functions are?
The violence interrupter is out in the street. He's building inroads. He's working with those hot spots, making sure that he's talking people off the ledge or she's talking people off the ledge. They are the extreme credible folks who are known because of their past history or just how they represent themselves in community. And so they go into the hottest areas and really keep peace, right? And keep peace with those individuals who like nobody else would be able to talk off that ledge when they're at their highest level. And so what ends up happening is the work that they're doing to stop situations is not really calculated or looked at in the manner of arrests, right? And so we were able to look at the violence interrupters' work and how many incidents they're able to really diffuse and mitigate. You would see far more than arrests in relationship to numbers going down is because of this, right? Outreach worker then works with those individuals day in, day out, like professional babysitters, and and not only creates diversion, but creates the ability for those individuals to change their lifestyle. From the simplest thing of getting a driver's license to signing up for different programs to participating in therapeutic services to engaging in wellness and therapeutic services. And I emphasize that because you can't really change your mind until you change your mind. And you don't know what you don't know. And most of our kids are not exposed to the ability to even understand what it means to be in a gang database system, the question of systematic oppression, racism, and its impact on their life, right? And so they're not interconnecting everything and everybody. And so we work with those families and individuals or the outreach worker to carry them from first on case intake, right? Building that relationship. They're like their big brother, their mentor, their support team in all situations, from going to court to going to the doctor to working with their children, building a better relationship with their partner, right? And so on and so forth. And so that's the two major
Thank
roles.
you. We're going to open the chat now. I have a couple more questions for Erica, but we're going
Right.
to open the chat now so that if people have questions they would like to have asked, they should write them out. And if they'd like, they could introduce themselves at the end of that. So we have a feel for who's asking questions, etc. Erica, how do we know this works? There's a lot of debate about that. And we have seen some really strong evidence around the country, but what can you tell us about that? And how should we think about even that question?
So, how do we think about the question is how many people are being fed into the system, right? When it looks in a system of death, incarceration, or just straight degradation, right? If you see the number, like for example, I'm gonna use our area, or just the other day, a site had 1,000 days with absolutely no shootings. 1,000 days with no shootings, and historically, prior to that, say they had 10 days. Every 10 days, it was a shooting, right? Those are real lives. Those are real lives that are not being shot. In our neighborhood, when we came into that neighborhood, there was 17 people being shot a year, and 5 people being killed a year. We went 4 years with nobody being killed. We went 500 or up to 1,000 days with nobody, over 1,000 days with nobody being shot, right? And so those 17 people that used to get shot annually a year, and that's 17, you double it because the shooter and then the person who got shot, right? Those families of those 5 individuals, like those are real people, right? Those are those family members or friends or people of our staff, right? Because we work and live in the same community. And that's a thing, because when you look at these credible messengers, they were once people who were doing the bad in people's lives. And now they are the ones who are helping heal and transform, but they also get re-traumatized, right? And so how do we make sure that we maintain their non-recidivism? Because that's a success, right? They're not going back to jail. They're the first participants. And then the participants are putting down their gun and doing something different. Even the situation that are putting down their gun and doing something different. The numbers of folks that were going, they're getting arrested, and the numbers went down. In 2017, we had a whole weekend here, and we had it last year again, right? 2025. A whole weekend where absolutely nobody was shot in New York City for the whole weekend. The whole week, nobody was killed. We had a whole week where nobody was shot, right? And so those are things that you can look at when you look at 6,500, 65,000 interruptions across New York City. When you look at the amount of mediations and people who are getting access to therapeutic services. I saw Anthony Posada on here. The people who are getting access to lawyers. So now they have their First Amendment right to be silent, or whatever right that is, right? As soon as they get arrested. So now they're not talking themselves into jail or talking somebody else into jail for crimes that they didn't commit because they're being intimidated by the police. And so all of these numbers are being changed by the work that we're doing. Even the fact that police and some of the sites are working together to co-produce public safety. We had situations where the police would call my chief of streets and say the young people are doing X, and he would say, well, pull the police out, we'll take care of it. EPD case, they want to knock down the door. He's like, hold on, I know them, let me talk to them. And so the way that they show up in our community had to change, and that is a success. And so there's many levels of success. We started with no money, and now totally not enough, but we're up to $136 million, right? That is a level of, Biden said when we met with him before he went into office, he was only going to put $800 million in CVI work. When he left office, he put $32 billion on the ground for CVI work. And you see the benefit of that in 2025. Those numbers didn't happen because of police. Police been here. Those numbers happened because brothers and sisters came back home and went into their community and worked with those highest risk individuals and talked to them, changed their lives, and are doing something different.
And we put a couple of evaluation reports, one from the controller's office, one from John Jay College, specifically about New York City. There's more of this material available nationally. And also, this approach is producing these results with 1% of the money that the police department gets.
Exactly.
And time again, we're told, well, why isn't there definitive proof that this is completely transforming everything? And yet these systems get 1% and often less than 1% of what the police get. And as we heard before, what the police are doing often actively undermines this community-based work. Victor, I see your hand up. You want to add something to this part of the conversation?
Yes,
And please put your questions in the chat.
Yeah, just something really small, but didn't want to overlook it. I know you asked Erica, like, how do we know it's working, right? Everything plus a million to everything Erica just mentioned, but also the consistency, right? I remember, just seeing the crisis management system grow from 8 sites. Erica, you mentioned, what, 46 now, 42? From 8 to 16,
Five.
24, 45.
From five
right?
sites to 46.
And it's grown tremendously, but not just the sites, though. The consistency amongst youth that's within those sites. I've literally just seen, I was in New York not too long ago, and I seen a young person who was 13 when I met them. They're now 19, and they work at one of the sites, and they're doing the same thing that they were brought in to do. And it's not only sites, it's the communities. You see the growth. When you look at East New York, A.T. Mitchell, Man Up side, and the Prince Joshua Vito Center there, and just what they're doing in these areas. When we start investing into community, that's how you see the change. And it's not just one conversation. Like Erica's mentioned, it's consistency. We're trying to build this a workforce, actually, believe it or not.
It is a workforce.
It's a workforce, right? And we need folks who are not just relatable to these young folks and older folks. Let's not forget there's older folks out there who are re-entering that have a skill set that's not tapped into yet. So when we say, how's it working? We've really got to look at our communities and let them tell us how it's working. Yeah. These wraparound services are curated particularly to different communities. This isn't cookie cutter work, right? Yes, there's a standard, right? But each community has different needs. And we're looking into these investments to figure out, how do we assess those needs? And the only way to assess those needs is to be in the damn community. Excuse my language, y'all. But I got excited there. But just wanted to share that point.
No, appreciate it. So Erica, tell us a little bit about what you'd like to see the new administration do to expand and improve this work.
I want to see the new administration first and foremost believe in this work more, right? To learn this work more, invest in this work more. We've created the city created an office of community safety. And so, in order for us to move to community safety, then we have to believe that the community can keep us safe, right? And I want the mayor and the administration to look in other communities and what they do in other communities, right? There's, and I don't know, and babe, maybe you can help answer this, but is there a database system on the Russian mob, the Irish mob, the Italian mob, right? Is there a gang database on them, and are people rolling through those communities and arresting their kids and blocking their kids? I want our kids to be treated like other people's kids, right? I want the over policing to fall back and us not to have to use police. And I remember there's a lot that I want this administration to do, and part of me has faith that hopefully they will do it. But I want them to listen and learn and help to market to our children that they're not criminals, right? Because and you can't do this by like, standing every time with the police. You can't. You cannot convince someone that something else works and you don't give light and life to it. You give light and life to what you believe in, right? And they always say, you show me a nation by what they invest in, right? And you invest by both time, resources, and your life, your persona, your gut, right? Tells you where you're going, right? So when something happens, where you going? Because your gut is taking you to what you said you don't believe in, right? And so sometimes we got to stand on faith, right? And as we got to stand on faith, and you got to believe and execute what you say you believe in. And when I just want to say a quick thing. I saw one of my young adults here. He's a young adult now. He started with us very young, and every time we would go to the precinct, we would see his picture and his friends' pictures in the precincts. And we would have conversations with the inspector on why are their pictures there. And of course, gang database, right? But not only that, the work that we do as violence interrupters, as credible messengers, you got to be close to the problem. And sometimes with our staff, they are so close to the problem, the police want to say they part of the problem. Because I might be talking to Babe who got a beef with Victor, and I'm trying to talk Babe off the ledge. Now I might talk her off the ledge, but Alex might be her friend. I didn't get to talk him off the ledge. The police see me talking to you, babe, but Alex goes and shoots Victor. And so now they're going to say that I told you to go tell Alex to shoot Victor. And so they're going to arrest me. They can't arrest me for the crime, but they're going to arrest me for the crime because they have the power to arrest, right? And that's what they're doing on a lot of situations. That's what they're doing. And so he just spent a year in jail because he punched someone who stole his coat. Now they know they wasn't arresting him for that. They was arresting him because of who they believe he is, right? And so at some point, I want the mayor to really allow our men and women of our community to begin to live their life, that they paid their time, or they're no longer in their child activity, or their working is work, right? And so to understand it and to really treat us like a we're a field, right? This is a workforce, right? This is a workforce. When the police came into my office, right, you have to speak on that. You have to say that's wrong. Like you have to stand up and say things are wrong. And you might get look, because we got it. We don't have a choice. We have to do it because these are our children,
I think,
right? It's
yeah, and I think one of the things we'd like to see the mayor do is show up at the Brownsville Safety Alliance at the end of the month and have that visible presence to support this kind of community-centered effort that's going on down there.
Yeah, I would have liked to see him show up for that 7-month-old baby with the
Yes.
group that's on the ground with the group that's on the ground working every day with that family,
So
right?
I'm
And
gonna,
so,
oh, sorry, I'm gonna
no,
call on
no, no.
Devin John, who worked with us some on these issues, who's got a question for us.
Hey, peace, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Debanjan Roy Chowdhury. It's a pleasure to see many of you again. Alex, I know you well, Professor Howell. Erica Ford, we met back in 2022 at the Queens Promotes Peace Conference. It's always a pleasure to listen to you speak and just be in your presence. Peace. Victor Dempsey, it's a pleasure to meet you. I know Dr. Sandhya Kajapita at Legal Defense Fund, so pleasure to share space. I'm just so moved by this gathering and convening of minds. As somebody who grew up in Queens in the stop and frisk era, Southeast Queens, shout out Jamaica, Southside, we outside. Always got to show love to being from this city and growing up in that stop and frisk era, and then coming back now, having a PhD in sociology, working at NYU with the prison education program, having worked in docs facilities, and also having worked with CUNY in Crossroads and Horizon, and seeing firsthand the power of CMS, specifically Life Camp, and a number of different orgs I could shout out. I know you got Guns Down, Life Up on your body right now. Shout out to
Yes.
James Dobbins, Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx, Kings Against Violence Initiative. At NYU, I work now in the Center for Urban Science and Progress, which is in the engineering school. I know it's weird, a sociologist in engineering school, but I study GIS. And to me, this actually originates with tactical narcotics teams in the 80s, who first went into South Jamaica after the assassination of a rookie police officer. But when Clifford Glover was killed in that same neighborhood, the cops were acquitted of all charges in 1973. And it was only recognized recently in the Adams administration in 2023, 50 years later. In 2008, when Sean Bell was killed in South Jamaica by 50 bullets by unmarked officers, that outcry and that call for boycott and protest to me is so important to understand the historical context of how we got to gang suppression policing, and also how we got the alternative to that, which is hip hop, which is Tupac, which is the Black Panthers, which is the Young Lords and community based organizations that have been doing this work long before it was recognized by the state, by the city, and federally. So I just want to say, I think it's really important that as researchers, as people at the university level, we bring CMS into the space. So we had a hackathon recently where we had Guns Down, Life Up, we had Kavi in the space, we had, Man Up International Incorporated come to NYU and speak. And Erica Ford, we would love to have you in the space. I'm connected with Justice Townsend. I was there when they gave the key to the city actually to CMS as the last sort of act of Adams' mayoral administration. And I think it's important that this recognition is being had. But one thing I want to say too is that, like, the point about workforce, I think this is so important. So what I've been doing is working with CMS and also HVIP, right, Hospital Violence Interruption Programs, which includes, like I said, CAVI, Guns Down, Life Up in Lincoln Hospital. There's a number of hospitals and units because, like you said, this is about trauma. This is about bodily harm. It's about our the medical system as much as it is law enforcement gets sort of so much publicity, but it's actually our medical system that saves lives, right? I mean, to be very fair, and so I think, and we had an event with Life Camp also back in 2022, where actually law enforcement from Queens Central Command spoke about how CMS should be going in and handling some of these calls. So, just not to take up too much more time,
Yeah,
but I guess
let's get to
yeah,
some other
yeah.
questions. So thank
Sure.
you.
So I guess my question is how can we as university programs like CUNYs, like the NYUs that are providing college now programming in juvenile facilities, that are providing workforce development for CMS workers, whether they be violence interrupters, outreach, mental health, data and evaluation, research, et cetera. What can we do to really amplify the work of CMS, but also assist in making sure y'all are getting the proper funding and processes to keep this work going and alive. And I know that involves policy as well. So just to put that out there, thank you all so much.
Let me say something about that real quick. The last round of one of the last rounds of federal funding before Trump eliminated it for this work actually gave bonus points to programs that had university partnerships built into the work. Not to just do like a formal evaluation, but to be ongoing partners to help them do improvements to help them with like participatory action research, to help them manage data, to help them do their own internal evaluations. And so actually, the Policing and Social Justice Project has a research team in the field right now that's looking at violence intervention programs, both within the CMS system and outside of it. And we're looking at case management and crisis stabilization practices so that we can help develop what are the best practices and also what are the roadblocks. Where is it that there's a need for essential services, but the city, the state, local organizations are not providing it, or the pathways to provide it effectively and efficiently aren't there? So I think this is super important, obviously, as the researcher in the room, in the panel. Anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that it's imperative that you and the folks that are in that field that you're talking about become part of the ecosystem alongside the 46 sites, right? How do we connect school? We just they did a training with Medgar Evers and talking about how do we expand using CUNY facilities to train and lift up the staff, right? And everything that Alex said, and how do we get some of the folks to elevate to become adjunct professors or participate in those things? Because like, what's the next step? We don't want folks to be violence interrupters forever. So there's a lot of different avenues and lane where, and even these conversations, right? Because he's at Brooklyn College. How do we put these conversations together more often so that the voices of folks can be lifted and people can be educated? Because some of these elected officials don't know. They just don't know. They just in their own bubble and don't know. And the police definitely don't know, right? And they come into our neighborhood, they're gonna be there. And so how do we, coexist until there's something different?
And Lehman College has just opened a new center. They used to do this work before, training credible messengers and supporting these community-based initiatives. So that's exciting. I see Obi has his hand up. I've made you a co-host. You should be able to come off mute, Obi.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to be hearing from everyone in this space, Professor Howell, Erica Ford, Big Vic Dempsey. Appreciate you all. My question is actually geared towards the esteemed Professor Howell. And you kind of alluded to it with some of the immigration issues and specifically how the database is being used. But I was wondering if you could like further, I guess, expand about how we're starting to see that the gang database and database policing and like gang designations being used and like weaponized towards immigrant communities. I know that's long been a huge issue area for the mayoral administration. And I think that we also see, and a lot of us can feel this disconnect oftentimes between our Black communities and immigration issues. Black communities that have long been champions fighting for these civil rights issues, who now feel as though they're being pushed aside and the things that they're saying to further like other identity groups. And I think that we always forget that, or maybe we don't forget, we understand in this space, but a lot of our communities forget that a lot of our Black communities are immigrant communities. 40% of our Black populations moved here after the 80s. So you got Caribbean immigrants, African immigrants who are being victimized by these same tactics. And I guess I just mean that to say is like, could you, I guess, it'd be great to hear, maybe not just for you, for everyone within this space, I guess, how we're starting to see that overlap really happening more and what can really be done about that in terms of like the importance of really pushing that issue forward.
And before you answer that, I want to ask also Kia's question, who had a question specifically for Victor about really what is the Gangs Coalition doing to try to hold the mayor accountable on this issue strategically. So let's put those two questions out for people to think about and to answer, and then I'm afraid, have to close things out.
Babe, you want to go first? Okay, Erica.
Well, I was going to say, yo soy panameña, so yo sabe que tú dicen, right? And you look at us and you don't know where we come from, right? To your point. And so, yes, the interconnection of what in some of our sites, they did the raid, takedown, and ICE was there, right? And so ICE was taking the father, ICE was taking the young person, ICE was in the house, right? And so the integration of the business of criminalization. I don't want us to forget that this is the business, and all of these things are tactics on how you keep people oppressed, right? And this is what oppression and racism breeds. And so, how we got to continue having conversations. We got to continue building connections between our works. Far too often, the box of gun violence, the box of gang suppression or gang whatever, criminal, the criminal justice people, the reform people, the domestic violence people, the hate crime people. Everybody's in a box. Everybody's in a box, literally right now, right? And so, how do we integrate? How do we build ecosystems that really form Voltron and deal in communities and cities and states and around the country collectively, even with funders, right? Invested in communities, invested in issues as opposed to individuals and one organization, right? So we have to drop our ego. We have to drop our, like I ain't messing with them. They from over there, and this ain't got nothing to do with me. We got to drop and we got to stand together and really address this as one issue of racism, oppression of our people across the nation.
Um, I know, babe, there was a specific question to you too, but one thing, even before I answer the question, what I would ask folks is, what are we doing after this call, right? For the folks who took the time out to join this call, for the folks who thought that this call would be some information that you would like to gather and hear, I'm all about bringing it back. Like, what conversations are you having at your dinner tables? What conversations are you having when you're talking to your girlfriend or your friend on the phone on your drive home? You get what I'm saying? So yeah, it's we can reach out to everybody, folks, but to Erica's point too, building that ecosystem takes all of us. There's folks on this call that I've never seen a day in my life. There's others that I love to see every day that wake up and do this work. But what are we doing with this information? How do we disseminate it the right way? And how do we not dilute it and give it real to folks, right? So I encourage folks and I implore folks to go back to your communities, go back to your jobs, go back to your organizations and spread this message too to get folks involved. Because it's not just about what we're talking about. We're literally talking about saving lives. Literally. If we don't believe we're talking about saving lives right now, then we missed the message and we missed the mark. As far as the Gangs Coalition's work and what we're doing to hold this administration accountable, is we're on its doorstep. We've tried it before. Like, we have to be front and center with them. When we talk about holding them accountable, it's not only the mayor, it's all of the electeds. It's everybody. It's each district that we're going to need to push in the right direction to hold the mayor accountable as well. But it's also briefings like this and the attentiveness of folks to say, hey, we need to be not just paying attention to the issue, but doing something about it. So part of it is the educational part. We have to educate this administration as well. We know they're new, they're young, they're up and coming. There are experts like Alex Vitale and Dr. Sell that's on the transition teams, but how do we make them pay attention? It's on the constituency to say, no, they're speaking for our people. They're speaking for us. So yes, I will say, I don't know if we can drop our Gangs Coalition website in the chat. Not just follow us because
we've done that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We don't need the views. We need folks to follow us so you're educated and you know what we're doing, when we're doing, and show up with us. Babe?
Yeah, I'll just take a moment to say the silver lining to this horrible, horrible moment of history we're in is that this immigration piece is getting attention. The immigrant safety is everyone's safety, Black, brown, Latino. Um, it's not new using gang allegations to deprive people of dreamer status, to deny them, discretionary relief in immigration, to throw them out of the country. That has been happening. It happened under Obama. It happened since Bush. He started really with the push against MS-13, and it has accelerated, which leads us to understand there is no safe database. The allegation alone can end you up currently getting sent to some prison in a different country. In that different country, in El Salvador, they lock up their own citizens in the same high CCOT, a human rights violating prison. That is Trump's future for all of us. So the lines between who is an immigrant and who is not are may very well become irrelevant. So, we can really use the fact that they're using gang allegations in this way to get rid of the gang database, to demand no sharing. One thing the mayor can certainly do is no sharing whatsoever with feds, any of them, period. Um, Obi, thanks so much for the question. It's critical. It does affect people of every race, and it is one aspect, but we're not separate boxes, as Erica said. Whether you're an immigrant or not, the gang database is something that undermines everyone's safety. And whether you're in it or not, or a gang member or not, it's still undermining your safety because it's allowing them to pre-criminalize folks and treat them without regard to the law. Yeah, I dropped the foil yourself link in there too. It's really helpful for people to think about, is my child, is my grandchild, are my students in my classes in this database? Um, so I want to stop. I want to make one other point. Earlier, you said, should we throw everything at this power, at these problems? Throwing police at problems of violence is like throwing gasoline on the problem. As Erica said, they come in after the fact. They're reactive. They are not there to help the child through the trauma. They're not there to help the people on both ends of the gun. Police are at cross purposes and they're threatened by the effective groups like the CMS sites, like Dr. Ford's site. They're threatened, and that's why they're attacking them. So they're undermining the safety that we want and deserve, and that community groups can help bring.
Well, great, strong finish there. I want to thank our panelists, Erica Ford, Victor Dempsey, and Babe Howell for this. We will be making this recording available on social media, on YouTube, through our newsletter, and stay tuned for future briefings in the coming months. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Straight ahead.